Prime Minister Narendra Modi is landing in USA for a 3-day visit, and his first stop is Delaware, where he'll be participating in the Quad Leaders Summit and also going to the UNGA for a summit of the future. I'm joined today on CNN News 18 by Tanvi Madan. She's a senior fellow with the Brookings Institution. Welcome, Tanvi, to CNN News 18. My first question to you would be that the visit of the Prime Minister, especially at this time for the Quad, just ahead of the US presidential election season, how significant is this? And do you think India has a big influence inside the Quad mechanism right now?
I think it's clear that India is committed to the Quad and feels that it is useful for Indian interests given developments in the region, particularly vis-a-vis China, even though it's not mentioned. But also in terms of being able to provide alternatives, whether those are security or economic alternatives in the region, in a way that India can't do alone and requires partners to do so. So I think we've seen Prime Minister Modi, engage with a number of minilaterals or plurilaterals, as they're called. But you have seen his own personal commitment to the Quad itself, as you've seen President Biden's. And so I think this is an opportunity for the leaders to both build and consolidate on what they've done in the last few years, but also set the ground for the future of the Quad, no matter who wins the elections in November.
And Tanvi, Prime Minister's visit at this time, Mr. Modi's visit for the Quad, as well as the UNGA Summit of the Future, comes after the Prime Minister has just been to Russia and Ukraine in a matter of 6 weeks of each other. And India is pitching for kind of a peace formula between Russia and Ukraine, and even Israel and Palestine. Do you think India has a role at the global level in the form of this peace messenger, in a way?
It's not clear to us in the public what if there is a specific peace formula. I think that the way these things work and what India has done historically, and I suspect is doing again, is, for instance, hearing every party involved out, making sure that interested parties are kept informed. And you've seen this not just with the engagements with Russia and Ukraine, but you've seen, for example, Foreign Minister Jaishankar travels to Europe. Prime Minister Modi has updated President Biden on his meetings and his other engagements, and so I think this is not an overnight activity that will be completed quickly. It's not a deliverable of the sort we think of as an agreement. This is going to be a painstaking, a lot of back and forth, a lot of figuring out what each side wants, what their guidelines might be, what their red lines might be. So I think part of this effort, and I think it's a worthwhile effort, is to see what is possible. But at the end of the day, one thing India has known historically, and I am sure the current policymakers are aware of, that at the end of the day, unless President Putin and President Zelensky are ready, other parties, there's only that much they can do. But I think it's still a worthwhile effort for India to be seen, not just be seen to be, but to actually see if anything is possible to bring this war to an end. And I think that's something the US has been supportive of.
Also, Tanvi, the relations between India and the US, how would you analyze it, especially in the last 10 years under the Modi regime in India? And now we had the Mr. Joe Biden, we're heading to an election season. How do you think India-US relations have shaped? Are they maybe the best? Some people say they are at the best right now. Some even argue for that.
What you've seen is every US president since Bill Clinton has left US India relations in a better state than they found them. And I think that's true of President Biden as well. Now, this is obviously mirrored by the fact that even in India, you've seen parties led by different governments also push the relationship forward. This is healthy in the relationship. It also means that both sides, for example, when Prime Minister Modi has come in the past, when he comes now, he engages with Republicans as well. He's not just engaging with the person in the White House. Similarly, you've seen that there will be engagement from the US with other parties and with other states in India as well. So I think part of this is that this is it's not just a they call a whole of government relationship. This is a whole of society relationship for both the US and India. And I think you have seen over the last 10 years in certain sectors, particularly defense, security, and technology, I think the relationship has moved further than many of us had imagined it would be, with some assistance from China, not in a very good way, but nonetheless, it has helped focus the mind, I think, on both sides. But it is not just a relationship that is about, balancing China. There are a lot of economic, technology, talent, people to people ties involved. And so I think, it's not that there are not divergences. They are on Russia. There's some serious allegations here to do with the law enforcement system and India's intelligence community. So these are tough issues, differences over Bangladesh. But the fact that there are more strategic convergences than there are divergences, have meant that both sides, President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, more recently, have themselves made an effort to manage those differences and ensure that the relationship continues to move forward. So I don't want to diminish the fact that they aren't differences, but relationships move forward when the convergences outweigh the divergences, and I think we've seen that, and I think we've seen both leaders put an effort into that.
A lot of one thing I've been hearing in New York since we came a couple of days back, also from the on the Indian mission to the UN, is that India has been pitching for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council very, very strongly. Prime Minister has spoken about it at least three occasions I remember recently. Do you think, given India's rising stature and a loud voice on the global stage, should India get a place on the table?
I think every country other than China, or maybe a few others, has said, every major country has said that yes, India should have a seat at the table. India has, now has many seats at many tables. But unfortunately, this gets caught up in a broader process of reform that, there's been some movements and some proposals, including, expanding the number of permanent members, but without a veto. Now, part of this, as I see it, is if a country the size of India, with just the population, the geographic size, the economic military size, nuclear and space power. If a country like India doesn't have a seat at the table, then and not just India, others, Japan, Germany, Africa, Latin America, just missing from these. You'll have two things happen. You'll have something like the UN not be as representative, and therefore you've already seen all these mini laterals being formed, like the Quad. It's partly because if India doesn't find a seat at the table, it'll create its own tables. And so I think you are going to, yes, does India should be at the table? Absolutely. But I do think this gets caught up in kind of bureaucratic reform and other interests. So what I think you will see is if the UN doesn't reform, it'll just be less relevant in some ways to solving many of the problems at hand. And you will see more minilateralism, whether that's through the G20, whether that's through the BRICS, whether it's through the G7. I think you'll see these other formats continue if the UN doesn't reform.
Well, my last question to you, Tanvi, since it's election season in the US, we can't escape that question. What do you think who's going to win in the US elections, and who do you think would be better for India, Kamala Harris or Mr. Donald Trump?
I mean, I have a rule that I never predict either the results of Indian elections or the results of US elections, because I think voters always have a tendency to surprise us. And there are too many factors, like who's going to turn out when and where, that kind of make a difference. So I'm not going to offer you predictions. I think that, as India will have to calculate it, India doesn't get a vote. And so it will deal with, because the US has become important not just for India's regional security balance, but because, as Prime Minister Modi has outlined it, that the US has become indispensable for India's economic and technological transformation. India will adapt to whichever candidate wins. I think there will be the questions they will have there will be different questions with President Kamala Harris. They would be thinking about how much continuity will there be with President Biden? Will she take the same approach, competitive approach to China? How much will things like democracy and human rights play a role? But I think on the main, there will be, and I think this would probably be India's judgment, more stability than in the case of President Trump, where it's not that India is unfamiliar, it will just be different questions. Will President Trump want to reach a deal with Xi Jinping? Or will he continue, India would prefer that he actually goes back to his competitive China approach that he had in the first term. But there will be other problems. India might prefer President Trump's Russia approach, but there will be problems in terms of trade, as President Trump or former President Trump said the other day. He thinks of India as quote unquote a very big abuser on the trade and tariff front. So there will be pressure on not just India but many others. Will he encourage American businesses, as the Biden administration is encouraging businesses to go invest in Indian production and manufacturing? It's less possible that that's the case. And you will see a President Trump that on immigration issues will be tougher for India to manage. But nonetheless, as I said, I think India will adapt to whoever American voters decide to place in the White House in November.
Thank you so much, Tanvi Madanji. This is Tanvi Madan, Senior Fellow with the Brookings Institution, and always a pleasure to speak to you and enlightening to speak to you. Thank you so much.